Meanwhile, on the comic box. Bow, 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 down, down, dip it dap, dap, dum, comics. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Comic Box, part of the Geek to Geek podcast network. I'm Rob, your friendly neighborhood comic geek, and this week we are talking about trades. Trade paperbacks. It's cool. It's gonna be good. But first, the weekly geekery. I got a piano, you guys. This has been a long time coming, and so we got it just a couple of days ago, and so for the past couple of days, obviously, I've been spending most of my free time jamming out, which is really nice. I haven't had a piano readily available to me since I left high school and went off to college, and that was more than a decade ago. So as a dude who enjoys playing the piano, that's been really nice. Also, if you follow me on Twitter, you might have seen that I went and bought all 6 volumes of Locke and Key. I have read it before, but this was the first time that I owned the whole thing. I read through all of them. I'll talk about it a little more in reviews. I also read the first volume of a new comic for me that I just randomly picked out on the Hoopla app from my local library called Giant Days, which I will also talk about in the reviews. Beyond that, oh boy, let's see. I finished up Season 2 of Penny Dreadful on Netflix. I am still chugging along on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. along with the We Can Do This All Day podcast, so I think I'm on episode 9 of the first season on there. And then I have also continued to plug along through the Lore podcast, which I started listening to get myself into sort of a Halloween spirit, but I've enjoyed it. So I'm now on like episode 25 or so on there. And lastly, before we get into the rest of the show here, I have been putting a lot of thought into where this show is headed. So I want to take a second and talk about the Comic Box, this podcast you are listening to, this podcast invading your ears right now. For the last 25 episodes, I've more or less tried to stick to a pretty similar formula where I go and do news stories, I do some reviews from my personal weekly poll list, and then I dive into some sort of topic of the week. Or I have, an interview or all my special episodes with Liam doing trailers and movie reviews and stuff. But from those few bits of feedback that I have received both online and in person, it seems like the majority of you folks out there aren't actual comic fans. Or at the very least, you're not reading comic books every single week or reading series month to month the way that I am. So, in order to better serve you, the audience, I think what I'm going to be doing from here on out is be more true to the name of the podcast as the Comic Box. So I think I'm going to move away from doing weekly reviews because all you're hearing is what's going on in the comics that I read each month, which isn't a huge list. So at the very least, I'm not going to be doing them as in depth. I might, mention a comic of the week or something like that. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus more on what I have been calling in this podcast the archives. So stuff that's in my comic box. So books that are already out there, things that I personally have on my shelf or in my comic box, which you can find at your local library. You can usually find digitally. You can usually find them if you go into the back catalogs with, a Marvel Unlimited subscription, for example. Things that you can pick up somewhere in trade and read along with me. And I'm still going to mention what I'm reading on the side, and if there's something I'm really enjoying, obviously I'm going to bring it up, but I'm not going to bog you guys down with weekly plot summaries for books you're not reading. I'm also going to be sure to do as many of these prep episodes as possible. They've been really popular. I've been getting really good feedback. So every time we have a new comic book movie or a new comic book TV show coming out, or maybe even sometimes if there's a character that we know, like when Ghost Rider appeared in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., I could have done an episode sort of covering the story of Ghost Rider and the comic book. Stuff like that for you guys. Things that you can enjoy listening to ahead of time, which then allows you to enjoy that TV show or that movie on the same level as the rest of us comic geeks. And I'm going to do my best to bring in friends and other podcasters to join me, of course, because it's always more fun listening to at least two people talk about the latest comic book news, movie trailers, and whatever else is going on in our comic book world. And of course, I want to say that I appreciate you guys. I love that you guys have stuck with me, and especially now as I'm kind of playing around with the format and moving some things around. So please stick with me. I hope that it's only going to get better from here. And of course, let me know what you guys like and what you don't like. I will provide contact info at the end of the show, or you can find it in the show notes. So with that, let's take a look at some of this week's top stories in the world of comics. Bop-a-doo, dop-a-doo, news. Starting out in the actual comic book world, sort of. If you do Marvel Comics digitally, and I'm speaking specifically here of their Infinite Comics, you'll know that it's not like a normal comic book reading experience. There's motion between panels, a word balloon might pop up. Basically, it makes it easier to read the comics on a small screen. They're made just for reading digitally, and it kind of helps the books come to life a little bit. Well, Marvel is now going even further with a thing they're calling video comics, which are kind of like motion comics, or the Infinite Comics, I mean, but they have more audio, video editing, dialogue, and more motion effects. It's sort of like what we've seen that are called motion comics in the past, and I think some you can even find on Netflix, or you used to be able to. Like they had the Astonishing X-Men Joss Whedon run on there as a motion comic, where they took the actual comic and tried to animate it. It's kind of like that, except instead of taking an existing comic and just trying to find a way to animate it, I think these are created originally just for this video comics thing. So each of these videos are about 3 minutes long. The first episode, or I guess the first issue, is split up into 3 videos, and it's an Iron Man and Spider-Man story. And then the next one they're doing is Black Panther. So there's currently 4 videos out. So there's the entire first issue and then the first part of Black Panther. They are free to watch. They are on the Disney XD YouTube page. I will link to that playlist in the show notes, so you don't have to dig through their page to find them, because I'm just that nice. Moving on to real Marvel TV news. If you've been following Marvel movie news for a while, just the MCU, you may remember that there was an Inhumans movie that was supposed to be coming out in, I think, 2019, but then they sort of quietly pulled it from the release schedule this past April. Now we know why. It's because they're turning it into a TV show. It's going to be an 8-episode show on ABC, kind of like Agent Carter was, and it's going to premiere in the fall of 2027 after their first 2 episodes spend 2 weeks in movie theaters. So it's kind of like these Fathom events where we're seeing these straight-to-DVD movies like The Killing Joke or The Return of the Caped Crusaders being in theaters first. Well, it's Disney that owns Marvel Comics, and Disney that owns ABC, and Disney that has Disney money. So the entire series is being shot with IMAX cameras, and then the first 2 episodes are going to screen in September of 2017 in IMAX theaters, which is going to be a very first. There has never been a live-action TV show that premieres in IMAX, so that's kind of neat. I'm not an IMAX guy. I prefer, large screens, but I don't want to have to turn my head in order to see the whole image. That's too much work. I'm too lazy. I want to be able to see the whole thing, because if I turn my head to look on one side of the screen, I'm missing what's going on the other, and I'm a cinephile. I'm a movie lover, so I like being able to see the whole screen. But in any case, that's kind of neat. If they show it on a regular screen, then yeah, I'll probably go. Obviously, it's going to pretend to substitute for an Inhumans movie, because if they're 45-minute episodes, hour-long episodes, you basically have a movie that's going to be in theaters, but it's going to have a lower budget because it's TV stuff. But it's IMAX, so who the heck knows? So obviously that's getting moved up, but there's another Marvel show that's getting pushed back to 2018, and that is the Cloak and Dagger TV show, and that's due to rewrites. They're still working on the script. It is going to be eventually showing up on the ABC Family channel, which has apparently, and this is the first I heard of it, has been rebranded as Freeform Network. I guess maybe they thought ABC Family wasn't ringing in the numbers. I don't know. It's kind of like sci-fi, changing the spelling of sci-fi and saying they're not about science fiction anymore. So ABC Family is now the Freeform, or I don't know if it's definitive article, Freeform Network. But they're going to be getting this Cloak and Dagger TV show, but apparently not until at least 2018. So if you are a Cloak and Dagger fan, my apologies. Marvel movie news. There's a lot of clickbait that I have seen in the last few days about Fox and Marvel having this huge deal that saved each other's movies and the big trade that they had to do. Don't bother. Don't click. Don't believe the hype, because I will explain it to you right now. There was a deal that was made, but it wasn't huge. So back when they made Deadpool, the character Negasonic Teenage Warhead has a different set of powers in the movie than she does in the comics. And when you do that with an established Marvel character, you need to ask Marvel for permission. They have to go in and say, hey, we're changing all the stuff about this character that you guys own, even though they have the rights to it, even though Fox has the rights. And so Marvel said, sure, but if you're going to use that character or change that character's power set, then we want to use Ego the Living Planet for Guardians of the Galaxy 2, which is the character Kurt Russell is going to be playing. So I'm guessing that means Ego was a Fantastic Four character, because he has nothing to do with Deadpool, and he has nothing to do with X-Men, as far as I'm aware. But in any case, that's it. Like, that was it. It was just a small deal made. They didn't save each other's plots. They didn't save each other's movies. So you can ignore the clickbait. You are now educated. Very small quick hits for Marvel movies. Deadpool 2 will reportedly be sticking to a smaller budget, kind of like the first one did. And also, like the first one, isn't looking to load in a whole bunch of X-Men in the film. They're going to try and keep it closer to the idea of the original, which I think was a great idea. However, they are still missing a director. As for the X-Men movies themselves, it sounds like they might be getting a reboot, or at least a reorganization of that franchise. X-Men Apocalypse apparently did not do as well as they wanted it to. And then Jennifer Lawrence, Michael Fassbender, and James McAvoy have all reached the end of their contracts. So it doesn't mean we're not going to see them or their characters again, but it means they're probably going to ask for a heck of a lot of money if that's going to happen. So we might be saying goodbye to those characters. So it might be getting yet another sort of reboot. However, it does sound like the Gambit movie is still going ahead, and there's this New Mutants spin-off movie that might begin shooting in the spring of 2017. And of course, as those movies get closer to actually becoming realities, we will fill you in on exactly who Gambit or the New Mutants are. Lastly, for Marvel movie news, Doctor Strange, second week at the box office, still on top. Second week in theaters, I should say, still on top on the box office poll, which means, hopefully, that not only will we get a sequel, maybe down the road, which would be swell, but hopefully that means that Marvel is now going to continue to open up the Marvel universe and keep using more obscure characters. Because now, Ant-Man obviously didn't pull in a ton of money, but Guardians, characters nobody had heard of before, did really well. And now Doctor Strange, character people don't really know, did really well. Obviously, a lot of that is because of the star power. But the point is, it doesn't need to be a Batman or a Superman or a Spider-Man or a Wolverine in order for people to come to the theaters. And hopefully this is Marvel saying, we get it now, and continuing to do these sort of characters. Moving over into DC movie news, there is a brand new trailer out today as of this recording for the Justice League Dark animated film, which has actually, surprise, been rated R. So they're clearly aiming at an adult audience now for their animated stuff, which is neat, but I'm sure that also means they're shooting for, teenagers who want to think that they're being naughty by watching an R-rated superhero animated movie. But it looks like it's going to take place in the same world as the other recent Justice League animated films and the Batman versus Robin or Teen Titans versus whatever. That whole same universe, same character design, same animation style. And it looks like on the cover of the DVD, because they show it at the end of the commercial, they're the trailer, that Batman is front and center, which, as far as I know, he's not a part of the team in the comics, but he's Batman, so okay. I guess. And in the trailer, it looks like he's a big part of the movie as well. But in any case, link to the trailer in the show notes for that. While we're talking animated DC stuff, move over to DC TV. Young Justice is getting a third season. The first 2 seasons are up currently on Netflix, so I suggest you go and check those out. Absolutely. I loved the comic. The comic is not at all the same as the TV show, but I also really, really enjoyed the TV show. I went because I was hoping it'd be like the comic, and I was surprised pleasantly in the end in that it was different and also very good. So no rush on catching up. Because they just only announced that they're going to be doing a third season, and it's animation, and animation takes a long time. So I'm guessing at least a year until maybe even we hear of an air date, or before it starts airing, certainly, depending on what route they're going. I don't expect them to go like straight to Netflix or anything. I expect it'll be, Cartoon Network or something like that. But yay, more Young Justice. Hopefully it won't be one of those things where you return after a very long time of a show being gone and it's just not as good. I'm looking at you, Arrested Development. Indie stuff. Couple more TV things and a movie thing. Why the Last Man, a personal favorite. I don't know if I'll call it a favorite. It's a really good read, though. So I'm not going to say it's going to be in my top 5, but I definitely really enjoy that comic, which is all done now. You could go read it in its entirety. Getting off track. The upcoming Why the Last Man TV show on FX now has a showrunner in Michael Green, who is also the co-showrunner on the upcoming American Gods television program that I'm looking forward to. And he is also the writer on the upcoming Wolverine flick called Logan. He is a writer on the upcoming Blade Runner sequel. Sorry, Liam. And best of all, he is also going to be co-writing the script for this show with Brian K. Vaughan, the actual creator of Why the Last Man, which is a big deal. You want the creators involved so that it matches the tone correctly, and even if they change things up, like Kirkman did with The Walking Dead, the idea is they still kept the heart of what the show was, and to me, that's a big deal when I want to see a comic come to life. Now, I might have mentioned the show in the past. I'm not sure. It's been 6 episodes as of this episode. But if you guys recall, this comic book was actually originally set to be a movie, and then a whole lot of nothing happened. They did a bunch of scripts. Nothing really went with it. And so the creators got the rights back, and now we're getting a TV show, which I think is a better idea. Speaking of a movie getting turned into a TV show, Sandman, which has been all over the place with a bunch of different people attached, and they're on and they're off and they're on and they're off. The current writer of the Sandman movie, who is also the writer on the recent sci-fi flick Arrival, which I hear is good, so that's a good thing. But he says he's hit a point where he just doesn't see Sandman working as a movie and thinks it should be a TV show instead. Obviously, that's not his call, but that kind of worries me. Because when your writer is like, yeah, this doesn't work as a movie, you're like, then I can't expect it to be a good movie. But who knows? Maybe somebody up on the upper echelons of entertainment will listen, and maybe Sandman will get turned into a TV show as well, which would be cool. Because it seems like the movies that are getting turned into shows, or the comics that are getting turned into shows where they're willing to put the budget in and the spend the money for the good writing staff and a good cast and stuff, seem to be turning out really well. So reviews, and possibly the last time that I run down my reviews for the week. We're going to start over at Marvel with Jessica Jones number 2. I like that it has the little parental advisory thing on the front. Not for children. We don't get a whole lot more to go on here. The story itself is building. It's only issue 2. But to keep myself from going insane, I'm turning this one into a trade read anyway, so bye-bye for now, Jessica Jones. Thanos number 1. I am a big Thanos fan, you guys. Thanos, however you want to pronounce it. But this book, this first issue, does not do it for me. The art's a bit too unpolished for my taste, which I'm sure for some people it's fine. It's written by Jeff Lemire, who I know people are a big fan of. And it's just, it seems like his take on the character is not the more philosophical type of Thanos that I enjoy, that Jim Starlin always writes. So maybe I'll come back to it later as a trade, but for now, I'm thinking the Thanos that I want to read is pretty much done with, unless it's Jim Starlin at the wheel and hopefully Ron Lim drawing, because I love the way he drew Thanos. Yeah, I'm going to say don't go diving for the new Thanos book. Doctor Strange number 14. This is all just bad news. This was not a bad issue, but I think I'm done with Doctor Strange. This was a standalone issue, which was nice. I like seeing little standalone stories. It was quirky. It's just I don't care about Doctor Strange the way Jason Aaron writes him. Now, I've never really cared about Doctor Strange, so let's have that out in the open. And he's snarky, sort of, but I don't know. It's not like, oh, he's charming, I enjoy him. It's not that. And I talk about Jason Aaron a lot. I like his writing. I really dig his Thor stuff. But it was the same with Thor. I never really cared for Thor, the character. I liked the plot and the way he wrote the epic storylines. And so while there is some neat stuff here in Doctor Strange, and it certainly might be the book for you, and this would be a good issue maybe to test that since it's kind of its own standalone thing, it's not enough to keep me around. So as of right now, I am cleaning my hands of Doctor Strange. Moving over to DC Comics, I read Hal Jordan and the GL Corps number 8, which is a good jumping on point for this book because the first arc is over. So this one is establishing sort of what the new status quo is, which includes a big twist at the end. Sort of interesting. Not nearly as good to me as Green Lanterns, which had issue 11 come out this week, Green Lanterns 11, which is still among my favorite ongoing series. This issue is not a jumping on point, but I'm still digging it. So I would encourage anyone to go back. If we're on issue 11, I did not look. There's got to be at least a trade. So maybe we'll tackle that in one of the weeks to come. Lastly, for DC, I read Wonder Woman number 10. Also a good book. That's all I got to say. Looks good. Reads good. Moving on. As I said in the intro, I reread all of Locke and Key. I bought myself a full set of trades. I found it on sale where it was cheaper for me to get the little box set than it was to buy the individual trades. So now I technically own 2 copies of the first volume. Though I was a little disappointed that I thought one of the trades might include the guidebook to the keys, I think is what it was called, which had these just little tiny stories through history of other people using these magical keys in this place called Key House. And that was too bad because one of them was one of my favorite things about that whole series. But in any case, I still love the comic. It was darker than I remembered, though. Like, I know the first volume was dark because that was the one that I had previously owned, and then I had, read the rest elsewhere. I had those digitally, wherever I was able to get my hands on them. But I forgot how dark the whole thing kind of remained throughout the story. So it's not for kids, and it is a fairly dark story, deals with some, darker subjects. But still, it's one of the only comics that both got me to chuckle and, got me tearing up a little bit at a couple of the moments. So it jerked me in the right directions when it was meant to, and that is something I usually can't say about a comic. Giant Days. This is the other one that I picked up. I also mentioned this on Twitter, if you follow me on Twitter. This was just a random pick. I was just looking at different books that I could get through the Hoopla app, through my local library. This one also isn't really for kids, but it's just a really fun story of 3 girls/women. I say that because one starts out, at the very least we know, was age 17, so I can say girls without it being, I don't know, mean. Anyway, 3 roommates in college, and they're being girls at college, basically. It's a good read. I enjoy it. And I don't mean that as in it's not the, woo, we're drunk and doing drunk things. Like, there's a little partying in there. But again, I don't know that I would get individual issues simply because I enjoyed reading it for free from my public library in trade format. I am going to go and see if I can get the other trades later on. I know there's at least a couple volumes out. So if you're looking for something very cool that's kind of its own indie book, I really suggest Giant Days. It's written well, it's drawn well. Again, not for kids, but it's also not raunchy on the level of like a Rat Queens, but there's adult language and stuff like that in there. Wow. The Pull List and the Archives. So, what I'm reading for next week, and this I'll probably keep, just to keep you guys in the loop of what I'm reading, is Hal Jordan and the GL Corps number 9, Wonder Woman 11, Black Monday Murders number 4, curious to see how that turns out, and Mighty Thor number 13. Now, I am also going to add to my poll list section things that I see on the list that are coming out that I think my listeners might be interested in. So, for example, Buffy Season 11 number 1 is coming out next week. So if you are a Buffy fan, if you've been following along in the comic book series and you were wondering when the next season starts, that is next week. I have been buying individual issues, physical copies up until this point, and now I am officially stopping because it took me forever to get to and read all of those issues. So obviously doing this podcast would force me to get to it on a weekly basis, but I think if anything, I'm going to move to trades. I'm sort of burned out on the Buffy stuff. Void, if you're listening, there is a new issue of Wayward headed your way. I believe you said in your last episode, you just get that automatically sent to you every month when it comes out. So that's coming your way next week. The second to last issue of Civil War 2 is coming out if you're following that event. And then if you want to go back and read some old stuff, there is a complete collection of Jim Starlin's Captain Marvel run, which basically kicked off a lot of what the Marvel Cosmic Universe began to be as it existed back in the 80s and 90s, and that is coming out for $35. I think you can still find it elsewhere as well. This might be a repackaging of the whole thing, but I mean, it was Jim Starlin stuff that eventually led to the Infinity Gauntlet, which we will definitely be covering as the Avengers movie gets closer. So if you want to go back and read, it's going to be written a little more heavily than your modern comics. Jim Starlin is not a light writer by any means, but that is also coming out as well. So archives. Here's what we're doing now for archives. I want to test this out and see how it goes. So what I want to do is pitch to you guys a book that should be pretty readily available at your local library, that's available on ComiXology, that should be available at almost any comic book shop anywhere, especially in this case, and then we'll read, in this case, half of it, and that's going to be our topic of the week for next week. So it's not necessarily a reading club. You don't have to read this in order to follow along with our topic of the week, because what we are going to be talking about is the original Crisis on Infinite Earths, which defined a new generation of DC Comics, was the first big major event at any of the large publishers, and effectively ended the Silver Age of comic books and introduced the modern age of comic books. So it looks like you can get it for $20 on ComiXology if you buy it as a trade. You can get individual issues for $2 a pop. Here's what I'm saying. Let's read the first half. We'll read the first 6 issues this week, and then we'll dive into some of the history behind the event, what the purpose of the event was, and then for the next week, we'll read the last 6 issues, and then we'll discuss sort of the legacy of that event, what it meant for the DC universe, and what it meant for comics in general. Now, you may also be able to read this comic for free online if you do a little bit of Googling and come across a site like viewcomic.com. But I don't think that those sites that host comics are hosting them legally. So, for official reasons, I am not telling you to go to view/comics.com, where you may or may not be able to read Crisis on Infinite Earths for free, and I am not telling you to just Google Crisis on Infinite Earths online and find a site that just hosts it as a series of images. But in all honesty, seriously, you guys, if you don't want to spend the money, try your library first. Or if you are able, go visit your local comic shop, toss a few bucks their way. It is one of the most important event books in comic book history. So if you want to call yourself any sort of comic book fan, you need to read it anyway, and so it might as well be on your shelf. I'm going to try and do books like this that I think every comic fan should own. I might even go into some of our previous archive picks so we can talk about those in more depth. But next week, issues 1 through 6 of the 1980, I'm going to say 5? series, Crisis on Infinite Earths. Link in the show notes to the ComiXology thing where you can buy it for ComiXology. The link to their website. Wow. Here we go. Topic of the week. Topic of the week. With the election behind us, I was originally thinking about going into politics as they exist in comic books for a topic of the week. I could talk about how Lex Luthor was the president for a while in DC Comics, how this past year Loki ran for president in Marvel Comics, and all of these other, political related comic books and comic book events. But two things. One, the election happened, and I'm pretty sure most of us that listen to this podcast are probably sick of election stuff. So I figured, maybe not. Maybe we don't. And also, I had a conversation with my friend and a friend of the show, some guy named Matt, who you guys might remember from the Suicide Squad review episode. And while we were talking about the podcast, he was on a long drive, said he's been listening, and he had some questions. And because he's not a comic book reader, and one of his questions was, what is a trade? Because I talk about trades all the time, so that kind of caught me off guard because I use the term so often. So I figure that's a great topic of the week to sort of kick off this revolution, as it will be on this podcast, of how we sort of shift gears and shift focus a little bit. So I tell you what, though, there was a fun little article on comicbook.com that lists some of their favorite comic book presidents. And honestly, that might have been the basis of what I was going to do for my topic of the week, because they had a lot of things listed that I was thinking about covering. So I will link to that in the show notes in case you're interested in presidents in comic books. The only thing that they don't have on that list that I would have included was the time that people tried to get Captain America to run for president, and then the other time in the Ultimate Comics where he actually became the president of the United States. But again, digression. So now let's talk trades, you guys. Well, actually, let's start with just comics, because that's going to help things out. So normal comic books, which sometimes we'll refer to as floppies because, like a magazine, they're floppy. So in the United States, comic books, just normal floppies, generally have 22 pages of story and then 10 pages of ads for a total of 32 pages. And I wanted to point that out because I think it was Void who said that he didn't even realize that regular comic floppies have ads in them. So obviously that varies depending on the company printing the book, because some only print ads for other books that their company puts out in their comics, and some will do ads like, Twix, or I have all sorts of old comics with ads for drink milk, crazy amount of drink milk ads featuring, Batman and Superman and Buffy and all sorts of crazy stuff. In any case, a trade paperback is, which you'll often see listed as, sometimes we just call them trades, sometimes you'll see it listed as TPB or just TB. They take just the story pages, none of the ads, from several consecutive issues of a comic book. So, for example, like issues 1 through 5 of a comic. And then they put them together in one book with a thicker front and back cover, like a harder cardboard front and back, and then a spine, and then the title is printed along the spine. So literally, just think a paperback book, but with glossy, thick pages, or thicker pages than a normal comic sometimes, so they're not as loose. And then it's the same height and width as a regular comic book most of the time. Sometimes they do like special editions where they print them extra large so you can really dig into the art. But in general, it's the exact same as a comic book, just thicker, with thicker paper stock for the pages, and then a thicker front and back cover. There are also hardcovers, which is a term you might see thrown around. These are just usually the same as the trades. And just like with regular books, a hardcover comic just means it's the same, but with a hardcover. Just like a hardcover book versus a paperback book. So same thing. Now, companies like Marvel and DC, they tend to do a hardcover first, and then they'll follow up later with the trades. Originally, trades were used to reprint hard-to-find or otherwise out-of-print comics, but then companies moved on to printing full story arcs in trades, like I said, like in issue 1 through 5. And now, most popular series get the trade treatment, as I'm going to call it, pretty quickly after whatever number of issues they decide comes out. So like the first 5 issues might come out. Around the time issue 6 or 7 comes out, you're going to see a hardcover. And then a few months later, a soft cover paperback trade paperback will come out of those first 5 issues. Think of it this way. It's like you see your favorite television show, and every single week an episode comes out, and then at the end of the season, you get a DVD set. That's what this is, except, it's not a full run of comics. It's 5 months worth or 6 months worth of a comic book all in one thing. And just like getting a season of a TV show on DVD or Blu-ray, I guess, if you have more money than me, trades also tend to have extra features on them. Like there's usually a foreword in the front by another writer, artist, or a celebrity, somebody who didn't work on the book but enjoys it. And then in the back of the trade, you'll have pages that'll have, the different covers of the individual issues that are included in the trade, or you might get early character sketches by the artist of the book, stuff like that. Plus, compared to the individual issues that you would buy, trades are usually cheaper. But hardcore comic geeks might disagree with me when I say this, but in my opinion, trades are a preferable way to read comics. And that's a little controversial, I guess, if there are hardcore comic geeks out there. But to me, it's tough to hit the store constantly to get those comics. And as I have learned over the last 25 weeks, it can become a real chore to try and read all of my new comics the day that they come out, to get my comics, read my comics, and obviously in my case, write reviews of my comics. But the ability to just go and pick up a trade at my leisure and read that part of a story is really nice. It's like binging a show on Netflix instead of watching it every week and trying to make the time to watch it every week. Of course, there are a few downsides to trades. While this doesn't always happen, trades sometimes skip issues, which is really frustrating, especially if one of those issues is like a standalone story and it doesn't add to the overall narrative, or if the narrative skips over an issue, sort of like a filler episode of your TV show. It would be like not including that episode in the DVD set at all. So that's pretty frustrating. And then the other downside, and this is what the hardcore comic geeks will argue, if you're constantly waiting for a trade, it means you're not contributing to a particular title's monthly sales, which are the thing that dictate whether or not the book continues or gets canceled. It's basically like saying, I'm going to buy the DVD set, or I'm going to see the show when it comes out on Netflix. But if that show isn't getting the proper ratings, they're going to cancel the show. And so by waiting and wanting to watch it the way you want to watch it, you are actually hurting that thing that you didn't know that you'd love. So personally, I would love to see a change, and I don't know that this will happen, but it'd save paper and it'd be nice for everybody if comics go out individually only on digital, right, for those who can't wait, and then they get bounded and sold in trades. They're kind of doing this now, where there's comics like the Injustice Gods Among Us comics from DC, where it's digital first, and then they package, is it 2 or 3 of those like mini issues, which come out weekly, into a monthly normal comic book. I want to see that, except give me the entire comic digitally and then release a trade. That way I can binge it the way that I want to binge it. And one last thing before we go on trades is graphic novels. The term graphic novel is sometimes used interchangeably with trades, but that's kind of tricky because, again, we'll talk the hardcore comic geeks, want to separate the term graphic novel from trade paperback, because to them a graphic novel is a term that should be reserved for books that are only published in trade format, which means, it's something that never came out as individual issues. It was written intentionally to be read as one long piece. Kind of like Kill Bill, where Quentin Tarantino figured it should all be one thing that would be a graphic novel, but Splitting it up into separate things, those are issues. If they get put back together later on, then that would be a trade paperback. I have no idea if that made sense or not. I also kind of tend to lean that way. I like the idea of a graphic novel not being just a collection of individual issues, but as one whole complete story that was meant to be told in that format, just because it helps in conversation. So that if we're talking about graphic novels, we know exactly what we're talking about. It's like talking about an individual book rather than, talking about, I backed myself into a corner here. Short stories collected in a book? I don't know. I totally backed myself into a corner there. I did. But yeah, so me, personal opinion, I like to separate trades from graphic novels, but you might hear it interchangeably. So if somebody says, oh, it's really good, this graphic novel, you might need to ask, oh, is that like just a collection from an ongoing series, or is it actually its own thing? Because especially when someone says, oh, you have to check out this graphic novel, and it's just one thing, that's really nice. Because you're reading the entire story, or at least that, chapter of that story. And that is it. That is everything you need to know, more than you probably needed to know, about trade paperbacks. So, Matt, if you're listening, I hope that explains everything for you. For the rest of you guys that aren't really comic book fans but are listening because you're awesome, I hope that explains it for you guys. So that is it for this week with a shooby doop doop doon doon digga da 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 wow dabba dabba da doop doom bop doop doom da ba da ba da boo doop boo. Ladies, gentlemen, children of all ages, star ratings and reviews on iTunes and wherever you listen. I will keep asking for these. I currently have 8 star ratings, so thank you for those 8 of you out there who gave me star ratings. And I currently have 3 reviews on iTunes. Thank you for those. One of which was written by Void, and one of which is me reviewing myself. So I am going to beg and plead yet again. Well, first, go read my own review of myself, because it's hilarious, because I'm amazing. But if you go into iTunes, and it is a weird way you have to do it. You have to actually search for the Comic Box as though you have never heard of it and aren't subscribed to it and aren't listening to it. It's kind of a weird route, but that will get you to the place where you can go over to look at the reviews and add a review on your own. And I would really appreciate it. It is how we grow the audience here. It is how we grow the greater Geek to Geek cast audience, and it gives us more people to talk to. And that is awesome. Speaking of, if you want to really dig into anything we talk about on this show, if you want to talk more about trades, if you have an argument there, or as far as trades versus graphic novels, if you want to talk about the Justice League Dark trailer, if you want to talk about any of the Marvel movie or TV news that I've been spouting out this week, head over to our subreddit at reddit.com/r/geek2geekcast. And that is geek2geek TO, not the number 2. So Geek TO Geekcast. And a special shout out to user Time Travel Marty over there, and I love that name, by the way, who started a brand new thread just to fill me in on the Marvel deck building game Legendary, which I might have to check out. It sounds pretty cool. I also got Liam to join us on there, so if you ever want to talk to Liam himself, or you just want to talk more in depth about comics, join us at the Geek to Geek Cast subreddit. Because seriously, if anybody starts any type of thread dealing with comics, I am there, and we will be talking. You can also subscribe to news on any of our Geek to Geek Cast shows at geek2geekcast.net. If you want to talk to me personally, tell me what you think about my proposed changes. If there are books you think we should be covering in the archive, hit me up on Twitter. I am at Rob's Comic Box. I also have a personal Twitter that is at Noby, at KNOWBY, where I talk about non-comic booky things and make dumb jokes and all sorts of stuff like that. Finally, you can email me at thecomicboxpodcast@gmail.com, and to get that is our show for the week. The Comic Books, talking about trades, changing the show. Gonna make it easier for you out there that don't actually read comics like I do. Cause I read the comics. Closing the comic box. We'll see you guys next week. Not at all related to comics, but I'm going to see Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them this weekend. I am pumped! And I even may or may not have bought some new costume pieces for a Mad Eye Moody costume. If that happens, pics on Twitter.